In today's video from History Calling, we look at the forbidden romance that ended in a tragic double murder in 1914, and at how that event set off World War I. This is the story of the marriage and assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie, plus the terrible repercussions their deaths had on the entire world. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria wasn't destined to sit on the Austro-Hungarian throne at the time of his birth, and as we know, he never actually would either. Part of the Habsburg family, he was born in 1863 to Archduke Karl Ludwig of Austria and was the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph I. It should have been his cousin Rudolf, Franz Joseph's son, who inherited the throne. But Rudolf killed himself and his mistress in 1889, and as he had only one legitimate child, who happened to be a daughter, and boys were preferred, the throne was now destined to pass first to Karl Ludwig, then to Franz Ferdinand. Karl Ludwig died in 1896, however, and from that point on, Franz Ferdinand was the heir presumptive to the throne. Unfortunately, he had a poor relationship with his uncle and at times worried that he was going to be cast aside as heir in favour of his younger brother Otto. That never happened though, and as the heir, the question of who he would marry was of the utmost importance. To keep his family, not to mention the laws of his realm, happy, it would have to be a Catholic princess of impeccable birth of whom the emperor approved, and numerous potential brides were mooted and thrown in his path. But Franz Ferdinand was uninterested in any of them. Then, much to his family's surprise and anger, he fell in love with someone they deemed entirely unsuitable. Her name was Sophie Chotek, and she had been born in 1868. Though she was a noblewoman, a countess in fact, she was not royal and had been working as a lady-in-waiting to another family member, the Archduchess Isabella, since 1888. When she and Franz Ferdinand met is unclear, but it was no later than 1892. Their relationship was apparently a slow burn, but it flourished during the Archduke's visits to Isabella's home. She hoped he would marry her teenage daughter, and by the mid-1890s they were very much in love. They managed to keep their relationship quiet until 1899 though, when Franz Ferdinand accidentally left behind in Isabella's house a pocket watch containing a picture of Sophie. Despite having known about the two's interest in each other, Isabella had assumed that Sophie was merely the Archduke's mistress, and that she could still nab him for her daughter. When the locket was presented to her by a servant, and she realised her mistake, she was incensed, and went to complain to Emperor Franz Joseph about his nephew's behaviour. Franz Ferdinand was duly summoned to explain himself, at which point he declared that he wanted to marry Sophie, with whom no impropriety had taken place. This was impossible, replied the emperor. There was no objection to her character, education, looks or behaviour, but her comparatively low birth, which was actually very impressive by any but the snobbiest, most stringent standards, and her family's lack of wealth, she was the daughter of a younger son, made a regular marriage between the two impossible. Almost the entire family was against the union, and efforts were quickly made to blacken Sophie's name and reputation and frighten her off by threatening the welfare of her family if she married the Archduke, efforts which nearly worked at one point. However, Franz Ferdinand was in love, and he would have no one else. The only option this left was a morganatic union. Having amended the law so that Franz Ferdinand could not even wait until he was emperor, then marry Sophie and make her his empress, up until that point it had not been necessary for the emperor's spouse to be his equal, Franz Joseph now made an offer to his nephew. The Archduke could marry his countess, but as his morganatic wife she would not be considered a member of the imperial family, she would not assume the female form of her husband's titles, so she wouldn't be his archduchess, and their children would have no succession rights to the throne, nor would Franz Ferdinand ever be able to renege on this deal, even when he inherited the crown. It was an incredibly harsh bargain, but in his desperation, the Archduke agreed to it. He and Sophie were married on the 1st of July 1900 at Reichstadt in Bohemia, and Sophie was granted the title of Princess of Hohenberg, which sounds better than it is. She was to be addressed by a form equating roughly to Your Grace in the British peerage. Good, but not royal. The couple would have 3 surviving children. Sophie, born in 1901, Maximilian, born in 1902, and Ernst, born in 1904, and they were very happy together. But Sophie was treated abominably by most of the family, who either pretended she didn't exist or slighted her every chance they got. She was not allowed to appear in public with Franz Ferdinand as he went about his royal duties, share an imperial coach with him, sit with him in the theatre, or co-host formal dinners with him in their own home. There could never be any hint that she was his equal. The situation went on for years, but gradually there was some softening towards the princess. In 1905, she was elevated to be Her Serene Highness the Princess of Hohenberg, and in 1909 she was allowed to accompany her husband on a foreign trip to Romania when its king pointedly invited her. Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany was also all charm towards her when they met that same year, and then Emperor Franz Joseph made her Her Highness the Duchess of Hohenberg, considerably raising her status in the family, much to her husband's delight. It's worth noting here that unlike in the British system, a duchess actually outranked a princess. She still wasn't an equal to Franz Ferdinand, who was an archduke, remember, not a prince, but it was a vast improvement. She was also allowed royal security of her own and to patronise charities and regiments. She was still treated very poorly on the whole, and the slights continued to come, but it was ironically this gradual relaxation of attitudes towards her, which continued over the next few years, which would ultimately lead to her death alongside her spouse. Let's now move forward in time to 1914. There continues to be much debate over the long-term causes of World War I, and as this video's purpose is to stay focused on Franz Ferdinand and Sophie, I'm not going to get into a detailed discussion of them here. For context, however, you do need to know that by 1914, Serbian nationalism was very much on the rise, and one of its aims was to end Austro-Hungarian control of Bosnia, which had been annexed by the Empire in 1908, and then combine Bosnia with Serbia. There was therefore a constant undercurrent of anti-Austrian sentiment in Sarajevo, Bosnia's capital city, and there had been for years. The Archduke was scheduled to visit Bosnia at the end of June to watch some military manoeuvres near but not in Sarajevo, though the exact circumstances surrounding the trip remain unclear. It has been suggested that he didn't really need to be there, but wanted to take the opportunity to have his wife recognised on a foreign trip as his consort, and that she was pushing for the same. Others have pointed out that Sophie had already been taken on successful trips to Britain, Germany and Romania by this time, and hardly needed the acclaim of the Bosnians. Whatever the true backdrop to that fateful day, both husband and wife ended up in the country in the final few days of the month. Something which most likely would not have happened a decade earlier when Sophie was never allowed to travel with Franz Ferdinand on such trips. Before we get to details of the visit, to support the channel and stay up to date with all my latest episodes, make sure to tap those like and subscribe buttons and switch on the notification bell. For bonus material from History Calling, you can also join my YouTube members by hitting the join button below videos or on my channel homepage, or you can find me on Patreon, Instagram and my Amazon storefront. If you sign up to my free newsletter on my website, historycallingofficial.com, you'll also get a complimentary guide giving you 5 quick and easy tips for recognising good history books versus bad. All the links you'll need are below for you. The Governor-General of Bosnia at the time was called Oskar Pačorek, and he was very keen that what was initially meant to be a low-key trip for the Archduke to watch the manoeuvres on the 26th and 27th of June, while Sophie stayed in a nearby hotel, be expanded into a more formal trip, which would include the Archduke's presence in the city of Sarajevo itself on the 28th for some official events. Perhaps, say authors Greg King and Sue Woolmans, he hoped the presence of the heir to the throne would bolster his own position in the region where his strong-armed approach had made him very unpopular. It certainly seems that no one thought to mention what an inappropriate date this was for a visit, as it was St. Vitus Day, an important national holiday to the Serbians, which represented the idea of nationalism to them and struggle against subjugation from any foreign source. It was not a good day to have the heir to the throne of the empire then subjugating the country arrive in its capital for a visit. King and Woolman's book, by the way, is linked below for you and was one of my sources for this video. My upper level patrons will also be getting my review of it this week as one of their bonuses. Security for the couple's trip was pathetic. When the Emperor had visited in 1910, the security to protect him had been monumental, with garrisons of troops, hundreds of preemptive arrests and house arrests for anyone deemed suspicious, strangers exiled from the city, and a route through it which would keep Franz Joseph away from open spaces. Yet for his nephew, there was almost nothing by comparison. There were a few score policemen, the route Franz Ferdinand was to take was published in advance, there were almost no arrests, Chotek studiously ignored warnings from officials that the Archduke would be in danger from Serbian nationalists who had begun to publicly encourage violence against him and Sophie as soon as the trip became public knowledge, and husband and wife were to be in an open car. It was all asking for trouble, and given the heights of his incompetence, which borders on the insane, it is little wonder that there have been questions about whether Chotek was involved in some sort of conspiracy to harm the couple. Franz Ferdinand, who knew how unpopular he was with Serbians, seemed to sense that something bad was going to happen. He showed no enthusiasm for the trip, tried to get out of it several times, told his nephew Karl that he felt he would soon be assassinated, and made arrangements for his imminent death, such as giving what seemed to be farewell gifts to trusted servants, plus the keys to his desk, with instructions that if he didn't return, they were to be given to Karl as well. None of his concerns prevented the trip, though. The Emperor ordered him to go, and Sophie wanted to be with him, as she too feared for his safety and would not have him face any threat alone. So it was that nothing got in the way of the visit occurring, and on the 25th of June, the couple arrived in Bosnia. They were right to be concerned, for a plot had been hatched to kill them. In fact, there had originally been two plots, one organised by the terrorist group Black Hand, and another by a group of three 19-year-old disaffected Bosnian Serbs called, and here goes my dismal attempt at pronouncing their names, Njeliko Chabrinovic, Gavrilo Princip, and Trifko Grabej. The two plots merged, though, when the leader of the Black Hand found out about the young men's plan and agreed to train and supply weapons to the teenagers. Numerous members of the Serbian government and military knew about the plot in advance, but none acted to stop it, instead assisting in having the assassins trained and smuggled into Bosnia. Some vague warnings were given, perhaps to create a veil of plausible deniability, and it is possibly these which had put Franz Ferdinand so much on edge. The plan was to have the three young men mentioned, plus another three, a 17-year-old called Vaso Kubrilovic, an 18-year-old called Sjetvo Popovic, and a 27-year-old called Muhammad Mehmed Basic, spread out along the motorcade route the royal party was taking along the river, and each was to try to attack the Archduke and the Duchess when they got close enough. This was still a few days away, however. On the evening of the 25th of June, Franz Ferdinand and Sophie decided on the spur of the moment to go into Sarajevo and look around the market stalls. They were warmly welcomed by the inhabitants, but remarkably, while they were there, they were within just a few feet at one point of an armed Gavrilo Princip, who considered killing the Archduke then and there, but decided not to because of Sophie's presence and that of a policeman. Chabrinovic was in the crowds that had swarmed to see the couple as well, but he too could not see an opportune moment to strike, and when he was spotted by a policeman who recognised him as a well-known troublemaker, he was chased away. The military manoeuvres took place in front of the Archduke on the 26th and 27th of June, while Sophie visited various churches, charitable institutions and schools in Sarajevo. Again, she was welcomed by those she met, but she had very little security. The night of the 27th, there was a formal dinner at their hotel, at which local government and church officials attended, and Franz Ferdinand was heard to say, "I'm beginning to fall in love with Bosnia." Unlike his love for Sophie, though, it wasn't to last long, though both would be snuffed out at the same moment. A moment which was now fast approaching. Heartbreakingly, there were attempts from some that evening to talk the couple out of going into the city the following day, given that they had already been there and the military manoeuvres were out of the way, and Franz Ferdinand was again keen to get out of it. But when Oskar Paciorek got wind of the plans to cancel, he strongly objected and managed to push the Archduke into agreeing to continue as planned. The schedule for that Sunday, the 28th of June, was for the couple to spend a few minutes at Sarajevo's military barracks, then drive for half an hour through the streets to the City Hall for a reception, followed by a museum visit and lunch at Governor-General Paciorek's residence. The couple left for the train station to take them into the city just before 9:30 a.m. Franz Ferdinand wore his military uniform, Sophie was in a white dress. They arrived safely and the visit to the barracks went off without incident. When they got into this car, though, which was the third of a 7-car motorcade, their security officers were prevented from joining them in the other cars by 4 local police officers who instead took their places. Franz Ferdinand sat in the back on the left with Sophie to his right. Also in the car were its owner, Count Franz Harrach, and Paciorek in front of the Archduke. And so the drive began. The well-publicised route took them onto a street called Apple Quay and along the riverbank where the 6 would-be assassins were standing in wait, mingling with the largely unpoliced crowds who had gathered to see this famous couple. It was a little after 10 a.m. when they came into view of the first assassin, Mehmet Bashic. He bottled it though and did nothing, later claiming that he had been put off by the sight of a nearby policeman. The car continued down the street and came to where the second man, Jabrinovich, was standing. At 10:10, he hurled a grenade at the car, but missed when the driver took quick action by accelerating. The grenade bounced off the back and exploded under another car in the motorcade, seriously injuring 2 passengers plus another 20 in the crowd. Shrapnel hit Sophie in the back of the neck, but it was a minor wound. Jabrinovich ran for it, threw himself into the river and took cyanide, which failed to work. He was quickly captured and arrested. After stopping to assess the situation and telling off Paciorek, Franz Ferdinand ordered that they continue with their programme, and on they went, much more quickly now, to the City Hall. The other assassins saw them pass but didn't act, and all but Grabež and Princip left the immediate area. At the City Hall, the gathered officials didn't yet know what had happened, and the mayor launched into his pre-prepared welcome remarks, only to be cut off by the Archduke, who said, "What kind of devotion is this? I come to Sarajevo and am greeted by bombs. It is outrageous." He calmed down enough, though, to see the short engagement through, accepting the remarks and making a speech of his own. The day's planned events were now changed. There would be no visit to the museum, though the lunch was still to go ahead. But first, Franz Ferdinand wanted to visit the injured in the local hospital. He was concerned about further assassins, but again Paciorek tried to reassure him, and also vetoed all the ideas put forward to beef up the royal security detail before the couple left the City Hall. Yet again, a chance to avoid the fast-approaching tragedy was squandered. The route to take them to the hospital was to involve a quick drive back down Apple Quay, but in all the upset and mayhem, no one bothered to tell the driver of the royal car this detail. Franz Ferdinand wanted Sophie to go in a different vehicle at least in case of further attacks, but she was determined not to leave him. It was a decision that sealed her fate. At 10:45 a.m. they departed again, as we can see here in a photo taken just minutes before the attack, and they began to go down the street where 2 of the assassins still lurked. As I said earlier, it's hard to know whether the governor was somehow in on the plot, as his incompetence is staggering, but we have to wonder what he would have gained from helping to kill the Archduke, and bear in mind that he was in the car too, and at great personal risk as well, in a city where he was anything but popular. It may just be that this man was monumentally stupid, wanted the kudos of being seen with the heir to the throne, and didn't want to admit how badly he bungled the whole visit and its security. As the car travelled down the road, it passed by one of the plotters, Grabež, but he did nothing. Then, because of the confusion over the route, the driver made a wrong and, as it turned out, fatal turn. Swinging into Franz Joseph Street, he was yelled at by Paciorek for going the wrong way and hit the brakes, causing the car to stall before he intended to restart it and make a turn. Incredibly, it had stopped directly in front of the remaining assassin, Princip, who had been hanging around since the failed bomb attack and was now standing outside a delicatessen. Princip later claimed that Sophie's presence gave him a moment's pause, But whether that is true or not, who knows? What we do know is that he pulled his gun out and fired, shooting the couple at point-blank range. Sophie was hit in the abdomen, Franz Ferdinand in the throat. The assassin later claimed the bullet that hit the Duchess was meant for Chotek, but there's no evidence to support that either, and given how incredibly close he was to his victims, it's pretty unbelievable that he could have missed. Like his companion, he then tried to kill himself with cyanide, but again it didn't work as it was probably too old. He was beaten by the crowd and arrested. In the car, the situation was critical. Blood was trickling from Franz Ferdinand's mouth, and he was heard to mutter, "So it has happened again." Sophie saw this and screamed, "For heaven's sake, what has happened to you?" Then she collapsed across his lap. It was thought by those around them that she had fainted, but Franz Ferdinand knew better, saying to her, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die, stay alive for our children." Then he too slumped forwards. They were rushed to Chotek's nearby residence, with the Archduke mumbling, it's nothing," when asked if he was in pain. Then he stopped talking altogether. When they arrived at the house at around 11 a.m, the couple were carried inside and laid out in separate rooms. When Franz Ferdinand's collar was removed, the wound was revealed, just above the collarbone on his right side. He was bleeding out and died within minutes of arrival. When you see this later picture of his jacket, you can appreciate just how bad the damage was and the kind of blood loss he suffered. It's no wonder he died so quickly. When Sophie was examined and undressed, the bullet wound in her abdomen was discovered, and she had no pulse. She died in the car from internal bleeding, the bullet having first passed through the car door, taking with it a small piece of upholstery which plugged the wound and prevented the kind of noticeable blood loss on her white dress which would have alerted onlookers to her situation sooner. The two were autopsied, embalmed, and laid out in coffins in the state bedroom in the governor's residence, with Sophie's coffin smaller and less ornate to denote her lower status. The following day they were transported to the train station and began the journey back to Vienna, where they arrived on the 2nd of July. The funeral the next day was kept insultingly small by royal standards, with foreign royals told not to attend as one last slight to Sophie and her position as a morganatic wife. There was a very short lying in state, it was only 4 hours, in the chapel in Vienna's Hofburg Palace, and most of the thousands who had queued up to pay their respects were turned away. Next there was a funeral service which the couple's own children weren't allowed to attend because they were the results of a morganatic marriage and so not deemed highly enough ranked to attend with their great-uncle the emperor and other members of the imperial family. The service was again very pared back for the funeral of an heir to the throne, and only when all the guests had left were the children finally allowed in at 7:30 that evening to pay their respects. At 10 p.m, the coffins were transported to their final resting place at Artstetten Castle. Again, the procession taking them through the streets to the train station was very simple compared to what was usual and provoked many criticisms. The following morning, after another service attended by their children and other family members, the couple were buried side by side in the crypt of the castle. It had been one of their homes, and they were interred there because Sophie was not allowed to be buried in the imperial crypt. Their identical white tombs are inscribed in Latin with the words, "Joined in marriage, they were joined by the same fate." It was the most tragic end imaginable to what had been a true love story from start to finish, and it would set off a chain of events that reverberates down the decades to modern times. Why did it have such an effect, though? You could be forgiven for being surprised that it caused a world war, given the cold reaction of Emperor Franz Joseph, who was relieved to be rid of what he saw as his troublesome nephew and heir and oversaw the insulting funeral arrangements, plus the general lack of grief in the empire for an archduke who had not been particularly popular. The explanation starts with Emperor Franz Joseph and his advisors. They may not have liked his nephew and Sophie, but it was an insult and a challenge to Austro-Hungarian power to have the heir to the throne murdered by a conspiracy which stretched all the way into the Serbian military and government, and have the event celebrated in some quarters of the Serbian press. Having been assured of Germany's support if they attacked Serbia, the empire first presented the Serbian government with a list of 10 demands on the 23rd of July, which ranged from suppressing anti-Austrian propaganda and calls for Serbian unification with Bosnia to a trial of any suspects involved in the assassination. They were given until the 25th of July to respond. This document was an insult to an independent nation, and Serbia sought Russian assurances that if it pushed back against the demands, Russia would have its back. Russia gave such assurances, and Serbia only agreed to a few points, offering some half-hearted assurances on others or outright refusing to comply. On the 28th of July, Austria-Hungary therefore declared war on Serbia, marking the start of World War I. Russia came into the conflict on Serbia's side, Germany entered on Austria-Hungary's and invaded France via Belgium. Britain had a treaty dating back to 1839 to protect Belgium, and so it entered the fray as well on the 4th of August. And the rest, as they say, is history. As for the assassins, only Muhammad Mehmed Bashic escaped. The rest were tried in October 1914 and found guilty. Under Bosnian law, no one under 20 could be executed, and so Princip, Čebrinović and Grabej got 20 years each. Vaso Kubrilović got 16 years, Popović got 13. Others who had been involved in the wider plot were executed in 1915 or given prison sentences of varying lengths. The man who fired the fatal shots, Princip, died of TB in the harsh prison conditions in which he was kept in Bohemia in April 1918, having already had to have had one of his arms amputated and become severely underweight. He maintained to the end that he wasn't responsible for the Great War and is celebrated for his actions in some quarters today, thus the statue of him you see here. That brings us to the end of this tragic tale of a couple so much in love and who ended their lives in such a brutal fashion, only to unwittingly become the spark for so many other tragic losses around the world. For another war video, this time World War II, see my episode on the mysterious disappearance of the Amber Room. For more royal history, try this one on the murder of the Russian Romanovs, just 4 years after Franz Ferdinand and Sophie's deaths, or my playlist on deaths, murders and corpses, which will keep you entertained with some of history's most dastardly deeds for hours. I'll be back next time, and until then, keep learning.